And I'm just looking around if we are expecting anybody else. I guess this is about it. Okay, cool. So, so a couple of things that we wanted to, oh, thank you for starting the recording, Trello. So two main items we want to cover today. One of them is to sort of pick up look at the lifecycle cost tool again, pick it up again. We were able to just look at it briefly for about 5 minutes last time we met. So we'll start looking at that. And then we'll revisit the high-level workflow. Chris from Metro Vancouver presented at the last meeting, and then discuss some opportunities there on whether or not you may have an internal opportunity to focus on any one of those areas, and then develop workflows around that. So before we jump into the lifecycle cost tool, I just wanted to note that remember the so we out of the whole asset management plan development business process workflow, we selected asset lifecycle cost development as the item we are going to expand upon and develop a little separate expanded sub workflow around it, and then use it use that process as input into our case study for this phase of the WISE initiative. So we developed the approach. As you'll remember, we had an approach document. Now we are basically putting forward this lifecycle cost tool. Basically, that's what it is, to use as a tool to implement the approach, to see what goes in, where does the information coming from, what kind of assumptions we need to make, what comes out of it, and what we can use with it. What we can basically, help us better define that process, basically. So let's share the screen. Okay, I'm guessing you can see the Excel file?
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of things here worth noting right off the bat, everyone. When it comes to a measure such as, asset like cumulative lifecycle cost change over time, the best way to do this, of course, is, looking back on a per year, even better per month basis. You basically accumulate charges tracked against that asset through the use of, support of some of the systems we have over time. So that's the best way to do it. But it's not necessarily easy to do, like projections, because projections require knowledge of the future, and we don't really know that, but we can make some assumptions, and then we can project based on historical numbers, like what perhaps things will look like in the future. So what we're trying to do is basically projections. So when it comes to projections, and especially when it comes to lack of actual historic data, we need to rely on certain assumptions that we discussed in our approach document, things such as using like the certain percentage of the replacement value for different asset types to cover like an estimated future cost for, preventive, corrective, or predictive maintenance activities, for example. Just before we start even talking about this, I just want to obviously just caution everybody, saying, like these percentages that, we come up with down the line, they're actually I think they're very specific to each of us. They are very specific to, like the specific location the asset is installed in as well. So like same pump, in Portland versus same pump in maybe one of your utilities where you're by the ocean and you're having to deal with a lot more like grit and sand basically than we do here. Obviously we'll have like a different, operating environment there. So you will have to deal with maybe a higher amount of corrective maintenance than we would here in Portland, just as an example, even for the same asset. I think the strength of this sort of an analysis really is basically developing some sort of a baseline based on historical data, ideally if you have it, but even if you don't, establishing with an assumed baseline, but trending it over time and see, how, it is tracking as best as you can with actual data over time. So that's really the strength of this, is that, just want to say that just because we come out with like a 2% here to apply across the board doesn't mean it's right for you. Down the line, everybody, I think, will need to come up with their numbers. So keeping that in mind, this thing that you're seeing now is like where the data is stored, and then we have some charts to go with this. But this is set up so that it is basically on a per asset basis, not even like, you know, like this is like for one asset. So, you know, decision support systems that you may have seen, like, you know, we are using AIMS here. There's like one for Riva. There's like a bunch of other ones out there. They actually help us do this on a per asset basis with their built-in logic. So we don't have to like go out of the system, do the numbers in a spreadsheet and then go back. So, you know, obviously this is just conceptual with that in mind. But I'm going to go ahead and start discussing what this thing looks like. And then we'll review some of these charts. And then we'll review some of these curves. So before I start, any questions so far? I can't see the chat, so somebody can monitor it for me perhaps, but any questions before I start talking about this? Okay, hearing none. Let me describe what this thing looks like. So this is a per asset per year per entry. Per entry meaning, I actually forgot what I meant by that, sorry. On a per asset basis, we'll talk about some numbers. So let's start. So change in life cycle cost over time. Obviously, it's going to be a time step function. So we have, you know, it's a dynamic function. So we have our, you know, year here. You know, I just marked this in red because it is the current year. So we can be tracking, in theory, past data, actually, if we have it. If not, of course, assumed. And then future data here. And this is today. So for a given year, we have a corresponding asset condition rating here. So in this case, we assume that the asset was installed in 2012. Its condition rating is 1, and then it starts aging, basically. So we go to the field and measure the condition. Either we listen to it with acoustic monitoring or whatever else, we measure the condition, or we meet around the table with the people who operate and maintain those assets on a per year basis, and then we measure the condition. Or we do it every 2 years, and then we fill in the gaps somehow. But the point is that for a given year, we have a condition score. From there, it starts becoming a little bit of a calculated exercise. Next thing that I wanted to calculate here is the percent life consumed, basically expressing that condition score in terms of percent life consumed. And the reason why this is important goes back to one of the earlier discussions we had around how certain assets decay at different rates based on their types or perhaps installation environment. So, you know, different decay profiles, basically. So a condition of 2 for one asset may mean 50% of life consumed, whereas for another asset, it may mean 70% of life consumed, for example. So this is where we start differentiating that difference, basically, between different asset types. Before we move forward in this file, then let's take a break and look at what that difference in decay profiles look like as far as this model is concerned. So in an ideal world, obviously, you would want to measure the condition of an asset as it ages, mark it in a, you know, XY chart, and then you can plot that. But only few of us really like have that luxury. So, you know, we've come across with this decay profile. I think I shared this briefly last time we met. But the idea here was going to be, you know, given change in condition over time, different assets will age differently. And we reflect that through an equation here that actually uses a shape factor, you know, something we call the shape factor, like the shape factor of that curve. We've come up with 5 examples here. So what you're seeing here is, and I'm quickly gonna from time to time go back and check whether or not everybody's here coming in or what. Okay. So what you're seeing here is condition on the y-axis and percent life consumed on the x-axis of any given asset. So this is set up as a percent life consumed at the x-axis, so the curves can generically across the board be used. So for like the, like a pipe, for example, that has more of a civil/structural asset category, may have like a much longer life than, let's say, a concrete, tank structure. But they have the same shape. It's just that they have different life expectancies, but their percent life consumed at condition rating 2 basically follows the same curve shape. That way, we don't have to have like a separate curve for an asset that has like 70 life and then another one for an asset that follows the same shape, but has like an 80-year life. So we just use the percentage. I hope that makes sense. But the idea being, as the assets age from a condition 1 new to a condition 5 old, they follow a different path. And that's important because when we go to the field, we can actually measure that condition rating. So we go to the field and then we measure it to be 3. And I know that, for example, we did like it's a pump, some sort of mechanical asset with moving parts. My recommendation is this shape factor 2 for that. That to me tells me that about 70% of that asset's life has been consumed so far. So 30% of life expectancy remains. If the pump life expectancy is 50 years, I have about 30% of its life remaining before I need to take action. So this is what the decay curve is in this case. So my humble recommendation for you all to consider is that assets with less moving parts, things like pipes, things like, steel or concrete storage tanks, are going to be on the upper right side of this curve. Assets with some, level of moving parts, such as, like maybe blowers, compressors, and pumps, and they will be, a little bit less. So I don't know, maybe shape factor of, I think this is 3 and this is 2, something between these. I recommend, if you're not sure if an asset really ages, just go with linear, or if an asset's failure curve is random, such as in the case of, perhaps electrical and instrumentation assets, then I recommend a linear decay profile for those. And then on occasion, if you happen to have some assets that actually, decay pretty quickly once installed, and then they reach a little bit of a steady state before they expire. And one example is like, like groundwater wells, perhaps, for this, that I like to think so. Then you can use like a less than 1 shape factor that gives you like a, a different flow there. But the idea being that there is a condition rating for each of these different shape factors, and then there is a corresponding calculation that this sheet makes for like percent life consumed. It's back calculated, but yeah, you know what I mean. So for a percent life consumed 0 to 1, there's a condition rating, so you can do the math, inversely. And for a condition of 2.6, you can say 16% is consumed for shape factor 0.5. All right, so we talked about this for a little while, and I am going to be throwing a lot of like curves to you. So I want to take another quick breather and see if you have any questions. We'll go back to chat.
Hello, this is Noe.
Oh yes, hi Noe, go ahead.
So you answered a lot of questions already, but there is feedback. I don't know why, but anyway, the asset condition assessment. Do you do it for all your assets or just the more critical assets?
Sure. So in our case, when we are working on an asset management plan for one of our asset types, all the assets get a condition score, but the more critical ones actually get a field visit. Even more critical ones are already subject to some sort of predictive maintenance condition assessment technology on it. So we go and extract that gap and use that as a condition score basis. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and then you said that the 2-year cycle, when you kind of go back and check the asset condition kind of rating, do you do it? I mean, it seems like you do it for all of your assets as well, I guess. Right?
Yes. So yeah, actually our cycle is 4 years. I mean, that was
Four.
just an example, but like our cycle is 4 years. So what I mean by that is, so if we do the math, if we go and get a condition rating of 2 today, then 4 years later we do it and it's 2.5. Like I'll enter those points, and then if I need to fill in the gaps, like I'll just apply like a, you know, either a linear or some sort of a curve, but like I'll fill in the blanks. That's what I meant.
I see. Okay. So some of them are you do feel, and some of them are you do it like on desk type of analysis. Okay.
And most of them are desktop. Know what I mean? Just yeah, like you know, a certain one of them will, you know, where they'll fall on our risk plot, and where they fall on the risk plot, then we may actually go and visit them in the field as a result.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, I was muted. Any other questions? I don't see any chat either, so let's carry on. All right. So that basically covers the very first part of this whole thing. The first few columns. Ugh, can't speak today. All right. Next really is just a really a life cycle cost. Just, you know, basically add the components, so we can come back to these later on a per year basis. This is the total life cycle components. And then this is just the cumulative version, is that, you know, we just add it year over year. So we can plot these separately. By the way, my Teams is telling me my microphone is muted, even though I don't see it as muted. Cello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's carry on. All right, then let's dive into then some of those life cycle cost components we discussed when we were writing our approach document early in this process. So what you'll see here is, oops, let me go back a little bit. So what you'll see here is we have a few entries for associated with asset renewal. We have a few columns associated with asset operations, and then we have a few columns associated with asset maintenance. Now, as an organization, you may or may not need each of these. So it's really, you know, kind of like optional into the level of detail you want to go into. And some of these criteria may not even apply to you, but they are there in case you need it. So the first one is that, you know, like if you had to go through some sort of like a sophisticated design, construction, you know, permitting or whatever costs you incurred to acquire an asset in the first place. So there is a space for this. The next one is simply the rehabilitation rebuild costs. Next one is replace. And then the next one is dispose, including the salvage value. So there's a disposal cost of, you know, $50,000 to get rid of this asset, but we were able to get $20,000 back when we sold it, when we salvaged it. So that would be like $30,000 there. But the idea being that these are like asset renewal related costs. In this example, we make the assumption that, you know, we already had one asset there, it aged, and in 2012, we went ahead and we replaced it, like for that cost. So this is the way it's set up. But as you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that in coming years, sometime in the future, you know, in 2031, we are expecting to rehabilitate this asset. So there's a cost, we are tracking it here. It may be a little earlier, a little later, but the idea is that somewhere there, we're going to spend some money on, you know, rehab. And obviously on a one asset basis, this doesn't mean much. But if you have like, you know, we have like 500,000 assets plus really. So, you know, when you add them up, and go through this exercise, then it starts making a difference. But the point being, you know, the asset ages, you know, it reaches a condition of almost 4, and then we rehab it. We anticipate to bring it to a condition of 2 at that stage. and then it will continue to age from there. The idea again being as the rehabilitation money is spent, condition is improved, it will move it to a different point in SDK curve. All right, so that's the renewal related items. Then it's a little bit more difficult to talk about this versus maintenance, but let's still keep the order that we have in the sheet and talk about this first. Operation related expenses. Now, this is very difficult to track on a per asset basis. Generally, we don't track operations cost on a per asset basis. The main exception sometimes, especially if you have sub-metering or some sort of decent assumptions, to take the power cost and then distribute them across assets in a pump station, for example. Then you can probably track annual power cost for that asset. I mean, it is what it is. I just use some dummy numbers here. But this is what it looks like. So what you see here, actually, one thing I should probably note if I go back, it's on the right side. So there's no shape factor associated with this calculation. So these are just hard entries. Basically, it's an estimate of what we think it's going to be. They don't make it very complicated. Anyway, so power. Now you're seeing a few things here on the left. So these are regular overtime or third-party operational costs. Again, oftentimes it's not very easy to dedicate specific, take, you have 4 operators at your plant. Maybe one of them is responsible to visit pump stations, 10 pump stations a week or something. Now, there is an labor hours and labor cost associated with that, and you could technically distribute that perhaps across the board and then track it against some of the assets. But it's not easy, it's difficult. But if you did, you could track it here. Same thing with overtime. Third party is a little bit more like, I remember visiting a treatment facility once, and they actually contracted out the operations of their dewatering operations, like bell filter press and everything else that goes with it, to a third party company. So they bill them, they get a bill, and then you can track it against that asset. If you wanted to, you could. I kind of imagine these being empty for most of us. And there's an other for anything else that we don't really have a specific name for here. So this is and if you not notice, the shape factor is 1 for these, and I'm going to read the maintenance cost shape factors in a little while, but basically that's flat. That's what it means. Actually here, let's take a minute and let's revisit we talked about the decay profile curves already. Let's go talk about maintenance profile curves, maintenance cost profile curves next. Okay. So this is what it looks like. So what you see here on the left, it's on the right side of this sheet is, and I'll zoom in a little more. Yeah, it's a quick chart, Y versus X. X is showing the maintenance cost as a percentage of replacement value versus the assets condition rating. So this whole thing is set up so that there are, in this example, there is 5 shape factors. Getting a little close. 5 shape factors. And some of them you'll notice, some of them are just flat or pretty flat. The idea being, whatever maintenance costs we are tracking, it is relatively constant or relatively constant over the asset's life. A good example for this is some sort of if you are on some sort of maybe once in every 6 months or once a year, oil change or lubrication or whatever it may be, and there's a cost associated with that. But regardless of the asset's condition, you're going to do that once in every 6 months. Then that's a flat, no increase over time, maintenance cost. So that would have a shape factor of 1 or 1.5, pretty low. However, there are other activities such as, parts that you need, wear and tear parts that are subject to corrective maintenance. not preventive, not predictive, but something, impeller is worn out, so we need to open it up, replace the impeller, put everything back. That would be classified as a corrective exercise. In that case, the idea being that there may be times when that cost increases over time, meaning like because of other things that are also deteriorating in the background, like the rate of decay of the impeller may be increasing as the asset builds more run hours. So that may actually be following a more like an exponential curve. What that means is that while it may be at condition rating of 2, perhaps it costs us a little over 2% as a function of its replacement value to make that fix. Maybe when the condition rating was 4, there's like other things that are wrong with it. We need to replace more parts perhaps, or it's a little bit more difficult to access things than before because things have corroded or whatever. Then we have to spend perhaps a little bit more money to perform that specific maintenance in the future. So this gives us the opportunity to pick a curve that reflects things like that. So the way these are drawn here, or data is on the left. So for a given condition score, we have a, what do you call it, like a value here for to reflect the percent maintenance cost as a percentage of replacement value, corresponding to different shape factors. So it's all one across the board initially, especially when you get rid of the digits like the decimals. But you'll see that around like approaching condition score of 1.5, depending on the shape factors, you are going to see that certain shape factors will start picking up more and more maintenance cost over time. So this is what gets reflected here. This number here is just a baseline. Baseline meaning it starts at 1%. You can choose as a utility. If you make this 2%, it would just lift everything up a little bit. Just bump everything up. I kind of like 1% because I think the shape factors give us enough variation to cover percentages as high as 12%, for example, which we will never hit. I mean, that's probably more like a super corrosive chemical manufacturing facility may have something as high as 12%, but I don't anticipate us hitting that in our line of work. So I think these shape factors cover things nicely. So one thing that I mentioned though last time we met was that these are the shape factors I was quickly able to develop just to sort of illustrate our point to you. But I wasn't smart enough to quickly develop like a shape factor that looks more like a bathtub curve, where it starts high, we operate it, maintain it, we learn, we get rid of like the initial installation, errors. And then we reach a steady state, and then things start going bad from there. So it's more like a, start high, downward trend, and then going up. I couldn't come up with an equation that mimics that, but I'm sure you're smarter than me, so maybe you can actually help. But the idea being that maybe there's a way to have a better equation that better reflects real life. But this is at least conceptually it gets the point across. So this is the reference to maintenance cost change over time, basically. But I'm going to take a break here before I go back to the numbers and see how this is implemented. I'm going to stop for any questions you may have.
I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Cello. Then I'm going to go back here. Okay, so now let's talk about maintenance activities. So we have our, one thing you'll notice that we have our shape factors entered through here. And then we have our baseline percentages of replacement values. If you want to use something different, entered here. Remember, the baseline percentage of the replacement value moves the whole shape factors, like whole curves, up or down a little bit. And the shape factor, of course, is that from that point, from that starting point, like how aggressively it increases, or maybe it doesn't increase at all. Again, just some numbers here. just to illustrate the point, we will have to come up with numbers for ourselves, like eventually when we're implementing this. But let's talk about maintenance items. So we have been, we've noted here there could be preventive maintenance, corrective maintenance, and predictive maintenance, and maybe something else like others. And if you have like some sort of like third-party involvement that you wish to track separately than your preventive maintenance or corrective maintenance activities that you perform, you could use this, for example, something like for things like that. But the idea is that we have maintenance cost. Now, when we talk about maintenance cost, just added a note here in case it wasn't clear. Like it's different, like the maintenance labor here is different than like the operational labor on this left side. This is labor specifically associated with getting the maintenance activity completed. So it would include the labor, equipment, and materials. In an ideal world, it will be a fully loaded cost. So not just like the direct salary, but including benefits, like whatever the applicable overhead for you may be. Ours is almost 1-to-1, so we are like on the higher side a little bit. Anyway, point being, we can here say something like, okay, our baseline percent of replacement value is 2, our shape factor is 1, meaning it's not going to change over time. It's going to stay at 2%, like through the assets, whatever condition it is, basically, through its life. So this just does the calculation here. So it looks at 2%, looks at the replacement value. It was around like $56,000 or something, and then looks at the corresponding, condition versus percent maintenance cost as a percent of replacement value from the charts page, and then it calculates this number. Same thing for corrective, same thing for predictive, except corrective maintenance, we set it up so that it actually does increase over time. So starts pretty low, equaling preventive maintenance. But as asset ages, the annual corrective maintenance cost average is increasing. But down the line, you'll notice that down somewhere here, we replace the asset, and I'm sorry, not replace, we rehabilitate the asset. That results in, replacement of large amounts of its components, and maybe it's almost like new. So its corrective maintenance cost estimate for like the following year now is less. And so forth. So it's just basically follows that approach. And I set this up right or wrong, but same thing for predictive maintenance is that it's flat across the board. Maybe we are only doing vibration analysis on this asset once a year. We've already purchased our materials and equipment we use for it, and we spend like 4 hours on it and we're done. So that's the cost for it there, like whatever it may be for you. And Scott, I see a chat here, so let me just read it on my phone.
Please talk about individual asset tracking versus asset class tracking in terms of maintenance strategy, budgeting, status, life cycle curves, etc. That's from Scott.
Yeah, so I tried to mention that a little bit, but it's good to start setting up some of these percentage assumptions on a per asset class basis. For example, in our case, I may say something like, for all of our centrifugal water pumps, between like this size and that size, we want to set up the preventive maintenance cost as 2% of its replacement value across its life cycle. And that number may change a little bit if it's like a larger pump. However, like it may be a lower number if it's a larger pump. However, again, like I mentioned it a little bit in the beginning, but I would like to caution you, like same pump installed in different locations may actually be like trending, and they may have a slightly different baseline as well. If you have actual data, the idea would be to correct it with actual data. If you don't have actual data, I think it's as good as it gets and relatively safe assumption to come up with like a asset class applicable number to use. For all the same pumps, in all pump stations, for example.
And Mert, just thinking, how that might assist in both determining like when you get to corrective maintenance and how you prioritize what specific assets you replace. It could be a programmatic type of budget as opposed to individual budgets, right? For, you know,
Sure.
by asset, and could help predict and estimate what your, you know, budgets should be and all that.
So yeah, and I think, you know, sort of in between the lines of your comments, Scott, you know, I think that when the asset has failed, you know, physical mortality or otherwise, we'll replace it. Sure, that's what we do today. All of us do that today, and we can continue to do that in the future anyway. The addition of the life cycle cost really allows us an opportunity to say, well, yes, this asset hasn't failed yet, physical mortality wise, for example, but hey, look at what we've been tracking for. Like we are having to deal with this higher maintenance costs as a result. And I've proven it with actual data because we've done work on it for this one specific asset, and these other ones are very similar to it, and operating environment is very similar as well. So it may be a more cost-effective regime if we need to actually intervene a little early, you know, before this asset actually reaches this higher incurred maintenance costs. I don't know if that helped actually, but like that's how I would use this output to, you know, it's almost like a business case in that regard.
Right. And to budget levels of staffing needed for predictive maintenance or preventive maintenance and so forth, right?
Absolutely. One of the things that I do, you know, when we write asset management plans is basically, you know, do an estimate around like the future maintenance hours needs, like, you know, because we are adding new assets or assets are aging. So what that means is that, you know, if you don't increase the staff accordingly, or if you are not budgeting for additional overtime to absorb that, then something else is going to give. So maybe your backlog is going to grow, or you are not going to be able to perform in-house replacements as much, which you will need to farm out. And it may be a little costlier perhaps. So these are all sort of like this interrelated, you know, as you know, management strategy, really decision-making process. And without this sort of assumptions, and then, you know, maybe with, you know, supplemented by some sensitivity analysis, like, you know, hey, is 2% really right here? Like, what if it's 3%? Like, does it change our recommendation sort of discussion? Yeah, it's really difficult to then make that recommendation. But with something, especially centered around some sensitivity analysis, like as bookends, you could a little bit more confidently make some of these recommendations. A decision support system actually is really helpful in that regard. And I don't know if we have separate like WISE, you know, team that deals with that sort of technology implementation, but you know, using a decision support system during the development of an asset management plan, that's why it's important, because you could actually run scenarios overnight, come work the next day, grab your coffee, and then see if it made a difference. Anyway, so that is the process a little bit there, but now I'm almost done. And I don't know, by the way, is Chris here? Because I don't want to take too much of his time if he's here, but I want to show some of the charts.
Next. He's not here yet.
Okay. So we can also cover his section ourselves, but you know, just checking. Okay, so we have a few charts here. Just you know, look at the descriptions at the top. So this is the asset lifecycle cost and condition change over time. So the cost related items you see on the left, and the condition curve is this gray, blue curve. So you can like see how that actually tracks over time. Going back to, you know, Noemi's question, not more comment. Some of it is actual measured, can be measured in the field or around the desktop. And some of it could be like, you know, you could be doing it every year if you are diligent enough of an organization. Like we are not, we do it every 4 years or so. So we have to sort of fill in the gaps. But the point being, we have a condition profile. And then that actually helps us figure out some of those percentages, right? So keep that in mind. And then we have different components that you saw earlier in the lifecycle cost, explained on a per year basis. These are not cumulative numbers, as you can tell. These are the costs incurred on a per year basis. Just gives you an idea of, you can see like as the condition score gets higher, you can see like a slight increase in the annual maintenance expenditure as well. It decreases again from around this level to down to this level after we invest a little bit money into the asset that year and rehabilitate it. So that's one way to look at this data. Another way to look at this data is, including the cumulative cost. So what we have here is, again, the annual costs, annual life cycle cost components called out separately. But we also can then plot like, oh yeah, the cumulative life cycle cost component here, looking on the right side, like this is what it looks like. Now, I didn't want to add condition to this one as well because it was going to get real busy, but I did it on this one by putting all the cost data on the left primary y-axis and the condition data on the secondary right y-axis. So you can actually see this as well if you want to throw everything together. Like, I don't like this one so much because it makes like all these annual, contributions like very small. Like it almost becomes like difficult to see them. So this is my favorite as a result. Again, so when you look at something like this though, one thing that I'll sort of like maybe prepare us a little bit for the next agenda item discussion too, is that imagine that you have your condition rating plotted like this. However, you can also be plotting, if you have an idea of what the consequence of failure rating is for this asset, and you've gone through some of those steps to express it in terms of a, dollar value. Imagine you can actually be putting a, monetized risk on this against this cost line as well. So if the asset's failure is going to cost us about, let's say, I don't know, $30,000 worth of investment needs to remedy, we could actually, plot whether or not we are, like how close we are as the asset ages to that number. Now, why that is important? That is important because if you look at the cumulative, or even on a per year basis, if you look at like, the annual investment we are having to make that asset, and it is basically helping us, manage a risk of like X dollars with like a little bit of investment in 2031, we are able to have, I don't know, like what is this roughly? I want to say like a 30% reduction in our annual maintenance cost with this investment. That one-time investment buys us 30% reduction on a per year basis of our assets. So we could actually show these cumulatively and then justify that, yes, investing $18,000 and some change rehabilitation actually reduces our risk, like, way more than that over the life of that reinvestment. So it is a good deal from a risk perspective as well. So it could actually start opening the doors for some more detailed risk analysis even. I haven't actually had the foresight to prepare that as an example here, but I'm hoping that you can imagine, like for a specific consequence of failure monetized number, there is like a risk profile that mimics the shape of the condition rating curve, basically. And then there will be like as a result, there will be like an ultimate optimal recommended intervention point from a risk perspective to these assets. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing momentarily. And, apologize, you had to listen to my voice for about 40 minutes here. I hope it wasn't too bad, and just want to sort of open it up for any questions or discussions. Like, I guess one thing I can say is, are you looking into these principles in your current asset management process? If you don't, at least are you thinking or talking about it internally to sort of take that next step and start doing something like this?
This is not, I think I mentioned last time that we are very behind, and we're most like if you're stuck in kind of asset registry, we are behind.
Mhm.
But I am very interested in kind of moving forward all this, right? Especially the asset condition assessment part. But I have a question for you. The curve, whatever it's called, the K curve. Do you use that also for your kind of condition rating as well? I mean, can I see it again?
Yeah, of course. They
You
bring.
did a great job, but there is a lot of information. It's difficult to kind of keep track.
Sure.
Yeah. So you use this also for. This is just for you need to have the condition rating for using this, huh?
Yes. So what we do currently, like when we write our asset management plans, Naomi, we come up with the condition rating of each of our assets every 4 years when we do our update. Again, it could be desktop or it could be field visit depending on the asset risk, but we have a condition score. But a condition score of let's say 3 for a pump will actually calculate a different remaining life for that pump versus
but you have to do that legwork on the asset condition assessment, although the condition rating, otherwise you don't have anything.
Correct. Yeah, and we do each of our assets will get a condition rating and a consequence of failure rating in our asset management plan. Correct.
And then you have dedicated people doing that, or do you have your maintenance and operations kind of trained to do it, or how do you do it?
Yeah, good question. So I'm gonna stop sharing again because then I can see the camera better. So for our predictive maintenance condition assessment work, like vibration or infrared thermography guns, like the oil analysis. Actually, we send out the oil analysis. We don't do that in-house, but like for some of the other ones, we actually measure it. And then there is like like a speed or an acceleration rating, for example, for vibration test. And then we have a table that converts that into a 1 to 5. And then that gets entered. Like there is a small but dedicated team for those activities that gets entered into the maintenance management system. For the desktop and field visits, actually what happens is that when we go like, okay, now this year we are going to update this asset management plan and all the assets in it. So somebody from we have 4 people in our asset management team that work on updating asset management plans. So everybody updates 1 a year almost. So they become like the facilitator along with like the subject matter experts from different groups that actually work on those assets. So oftentimes, either through meetings or the facilitator will take the leap of faith and then do the initial scoring based on their best guess to be corrected and adjusted by the subject matter experts, like in workshops, like a couple of workshops after the fact. But the idea is that we develop it, like there's one dedicated facilitator responsible for making sure that there's a condition score for every asset. Now, one thing I'll note is that it's kind of easy to have a condition rating for a pump because, like you can visit it, or at least you can look at its maintenance history. It is more difficult to come up with a condition score for a service line or a pipe somewhere, like those we use some other techniques, some statistical analysis of failure data for those. But that's one of those that kind of like do it once, apply it across the board and done until you have to like revisit it, like with updated failure data 5 years later, sort of thing. So that's how we approach that asset difference there. But yeah, I guess I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, you need to have a condition score at the end of the day in some way or fashion to be able to put that. Now, if you don't have that, you can still get to like a % life remaining number.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can only get there by life expectancy assumption and like a, age, if you know the age of the asset or something. Now, that is, I think most of us, I think maybe all of us are aware that like age in itself is not like the best indicator for future performance. So just we gotta always like it makes our sensitivity analysis part a little bit like broad, right? So as a result.
Okay.
Hey, Mark, Oh, go ahead, Noemi.
No, thank you. I was going to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I just, you asked the question and Noemi spoke up, and I would just say that with Casey, you know, on the line, you know, and Ben on the line, what about the applicability of this particular tool, model, system, and, you know, anything similar that you're doing?
Oh, I think it's absolutely applicable. The way it's laid out is very good. You know, I think the assumptions are a good starting point that then we, you know, kind of can adjust for real life. We'll each have a different real life, like Mert said. You know, we're not to the point of applying this yet, just because our data isn't there, and even our tracking of maintenance cost sadly isn't there yet. But we are definitely laying this out to use and as a justification for increasing our data, you know, as a justification to say we need to collect this data, we need to collect condition, we need to collect maintenance costs even on these assets. The one thing that we're putting in with it as well is, and you mentioned this, is the risk cost as well. And so that helps us. The risk cost tends to increase, you know, on a curve, something like the maintenance cost does. So it kind of, you know, it brings that right side of the graph up about the same rate, maybe a little bit more than or maybe a little bit faster growing curve on the right side. And we do our risks as a risk cost, you know, like you were saying, you know.
That is good, because we are not doing that yet, for example.
Yeah.
We only apply risk cost once something raises to the, you know, it's identified as a need, and then we decide to do a business case for it. Then, only then we'll jump that hurdle.
And it's an assumption. I mean, if you figure the risk, we tend to like to use a 10 by 10 scale for likelihood and consequence, which then gives you a 100 score risk at max when you multiply those. And so we'll apply that. You get, it's not exactly a percentage, but it's on a it's on a 100 scale, and you can plot that assumed risk over time by multiplying it by your cost of consequence, basically.
Casey, it would be great if you were able to, you know, share that with whatever you have. Maybe it's not fully developed or whatever.
It's really not. I mean, it's right now it's a kind of agreed upon approach.
Yeah.
That we have.
Sure.
I don't have much to share on it other than just kind of talking about it, but
sure.
But that's the way we've kind of agreed to approach it, and that, you know, our team here is kind of in agreement to look at. None of that conflicts with what you put together, Mert, of, you know, that all just feeds right into it and helps. And so we've done quite a bit of training with IAM, and that approach really does. That helps get your bathtub curve, because the left hand of your bathtub curve ends up being your annualized replacement cost, basically. So year one, you've spent, you know, if you replace it at year one, you've wasted 100% of the cost. If you replace it at year two, you've wasted 50%, you know, 30%, and the next, you know, 33%. Yeah, so you get a nice, and that makes up the kind of left-hand side of your bathtub curve. The increasing maintenance and increasing risk together make up the right-hand side of your bathtub curve. And then basically adding all three of those curves, the sum of all three of those curves, the area under the curve, really does get that nice bathtub curve that shows you, you know, it's all theoretical and statistical, but it really does show you the low point in that bathtub curve is your ideal replacement point.
So Mert, it might be worth putting in risk cost into the model with some kind of a.
Yeah, I
some
wish
kind of
I
a
had
curve.
that. Yeah, I wish I had that foresight, Scott, now that I'm thinking about it. But I to be honest, I couldn't really follow the process. Maybe it would have been nice if I was able to like see it, but I couldn't follow it fully, Casey. But I mean, I get the importance of the bathtub curve. I get the importance of accumulating it over time, obviously.
But again, I think for people starting out, and that's all of us, what you've done is perfect, because you start thinking of how your maintenance and how your refurbishment is going. And if you can do that, then you can add the next layer on it. You can do your risk separately and superimpose those.
Sure, you can do that. Correct.
Um,
I'm gonna try to do it anyway, in as an example for our next get together. But and we won't be able to cover what Chris wanted to cover, so we'll have to revisit that next time too. But one thing that I want to just say is that let's use this model as long as like, and I can obviously change it, but we can keep this one, create another one with like change some of those assumptions a little bit. We have like 2 things to work with, and then let's open up our past workflow and then see if we can then, what can we do then to develop the more detailed workflow for life cycle costing. Because what Chris showed earlier, and we won't be able to go into this, but I think it's in the link we sent before to the team, but this is the this was that high level workflow. So this talks about the asset data and the work management work, and then collection of the costs over time. And then the decay curve updates occasionally, and then the analysis of the life cycle data to reach that model for that specific asset. Then we can make decisions off of. So, we can maybe build our more detailed, BPMN compliant life cycle cost development sub-process, maybe with these sorts of inputs now coming together at next time we meet.
Okay, I think we're at the top of the hour. Some people may have been dropped off, but I'll stop the recording just so that